In Gen Z, 1% have a biblical worldview. And 70% of young adults who are significantly involved in church in their high school years are no longer even attending church by the time they reach their mid-20s. That's the bad news, but I want to give you the good news. It is not inevitable that young adults walk away from their faith.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. It's available on Apple, Google, Spotify, Edify Liftable, wherever you get your podcasts. Please take 30 seconds and leave a review for the show on your favorite platform. You cannot believe how many hundreds more people can hear about the show just because one reviewer helps to get the word out. On this show, I interview major thought leaders from many fields of influence, showing how our worldview changes everything. Well, what would it be like for me to be interviewed? This is an unusual show. We're actually going to play for you a panel that I was a part of on how churches can help develop a biblical worldview. On the panel, this was at a Turning Point USA Pastors Summit in California. On the panel were two other people who have both been guests on this show. John Cooper, who is the lead singer of Skillet, which is a multi-platinum band. Their song Monster is the best-selling rock and roll song, apparently, of all time. And then also Lucas Miles, who is a pastor who writes on Christianity and wokeness. So the three of us together do the panel and answer the questions about how churches can help inspire a biblical worldview. We're putting this on the Dr. Jeff Show podcast because this might be a conversation you want to have with your own home church. We want to be raising young adults who are solid in their faith and prepared for the challenges of the culture.
This panel, as was mentioned, we're going to focus on biblical worldview. But before we jump in, I want to give each of these guys a second to just share who you guys are and your name.
I'm Jeff Myers. I'm the president of Summit Ministries, based in the little hippie town of Manitou Springs, Colorado. And for 62 years, we have been training young adults to embrace a biblical worldview, embrace God's truth, and champion a biblical worldview so they can be difference makers in every aspect of the culture, including politics, the military, science, business, education, and that's it. Yeah.
Jeff is the best. My name is Lucas Miles. I'm the president of the Influence Network and the author of the new book, Woke Jesus, that came out here just back in June. I am published through Humanix, which is Newsmax's publishing arm. Did a show on Epoch TV called Church and State. And I'm in South Bend, where I've been battling the Pete Buttigieg regime since like 2012. So that's who I am.
I'm John Cooper. I'm going to be as loud as Lucas.
I'm John Cooper. I play in a rock band called Skillet. And we sing some rockers. I like it. I'm a follower of Jesus. 2015 is when I decided that if Christ was Lord of everything, then I think Christ has something to say about the public sphere, about policy, about politics, about sex, about culture. And it wasn't enough just to play Christian music anymore. I had to get a little bit loud so that we could see Jesus Christ glorified. And so that's why I'm here. I'm thrilled to be here with, actually, these are my friends. Not Jared, but
Hey, so I want to jump right into this, though. You know, I read a statistic from Barna Group that said 6% of Americans have a biblical worldview. So I want you guys to answer the question, how did it get this bad to where in America, only 6% have a biblical worldview? Want to start, Jeff?
I'd like to speak specifically to the generation I work with. So I work mostly with Gen Z, and I work with tens of thousands of them every year. What we've seen is an embrace of counterfeit worldviews that have decimated the education system. Why did it happen? I think at some point along the way, we shifted from the idea that we should be people who seek the truth, and instead we should be people who speak our truth. So we've given up on the idea that truth actually exists and is knowable by us. As the statistics on the belief in truth go down for the generation I work with, the statistics on all kinds of maladies, even mental illnesses, continue to skyrocket. So 75% of the young adults I work with say they do not have a sense of purpose that gives meaning to their lives. 75%. 53% say they regularly struggle with anxiety and depression. And nobody will believe this, but this is, if you work with young adults, you'll know this is true. 39% do not know what gender they are. 39%.
I think that, a lot of the ministry of the church is reactionary. And you look back at the seeker-sensitive movement. It did a great job of making converts and a very poor job of making disciples. And so, I call it the genetically engineered church. I was walking down the road one day eating an orange, and I was just having a conversation with the Lord, and this orange happened to be a seedless orange. And it was kind of like God was asking me, what do you like about this orange? And I'm talking to him, and this is what my spirituality looks like. Don't judge me. And so I'm going, okay, it's bright colored, it's juicy, it's easy to eat. There's no seeds for me to choke on. And it was basically like he said, that this is my church. Because the reality is a genetically engineered piece of fruit is actually very good for the single consumption, but it doesn't have the genetic makeup to be able to reproduce itself into the next generation. And I think that's the seeker-sensitive church left us at that place with enough sustenance for that generation that got saved, but not enough sustenance to reproduce in the next generation. And then they became the perfect substrate for the progressive church to really get that ideology to get planted in them and kind of push them into this woke culture that we're seeing today.
That's fantastic. I think that at some point along the line, it seems to me that the church decided that we're going to let Jesus tell us how to get to heaven, and we're going to let man tell us how to live on earth. And it doesn't really matter. It's going to be fine because it can't actually get that bad. It can't get so bad that like your kids are being trans at school. It can't get so bad that the smartest and most intelligent people in our country would say that a man can have a period. And if you disagree, you're going to get kicked off of social media or lose your job. It could never really get that bad. So I think that we just we've been a little bit like the prodigal son. We took the money, we took the inheritance, and we're like, I'm never going to run out. It's going to be fine. I'm going to spend it on booze and women and all the things I want to do. And it'll never get that bad. And guess what? We are seeing the fruit now of what it means to follow man instead of follow Christ. And it is so much worse than anybody ever, I think any of us ever imagined it could be. And it is so bad and so enticing that even large portions of the church are saying, maybe man is right. Maybe God isn't right. And all of a sudden the church has gotten compromised because the church is weak and impotent and not been living in the power of the Spirit of God. They've just been trying to make man happy and get those, I call them woke cookies. They're like accolades. It's the virtue points from the world. They want those woke cookies, man. So we got to go back to the Word of God or we're going to be in a bad, bad situation.
That's good. So, there's so many different worldviews. I think I counted up to maybe 7 or 8 different worldviews if you want to identify them, right? But what is so compelling about these other worldviews that are swaying and alluring, a whole generation and the entire nation almost, 94% of the nation, to adopt these worldviews? What is it about these other ones?
I'm going to try to give my answer as quickly as possible because I want to hear what these guys have to say. I think what's compelling about a false worldview, and by the way, when I use the term worldview, I mean a pattern of ideas, of beliefs, of convictions, and of habits that help us make sense of God, the world, and our relationship to God and the world. So when we talk about counterfeit worldviews, it's like a counterfeit watch. It's actually not just a different view of the world. It is a view of a different world. So a Marxist will say the world you think exists, in which God is the creator and Jesus rose from the dead, is not the world that actually exists. Instead, a world exists where you could explain all of your inadequacies by the fact that you are oppressed by people who are in power. And then you can get resolution. You can have salvation through revolution. Okay, so that's an example of a worldview. A lot of what creates it is just this sense of, I have somehow missed out. This was Satan as the serpent in the garden to Eve. Satan didn't come in and say, hey, I'm going to tell you a lie, and I hope that you believe me. the serpent came in and said, what God told you is a lie, and I'm going to tell you the truth. God is not good. And so anybody who can take that kind of a shortcut and get the appearance of real value without having to actually put in the work because it's somebody else's fault, that pretty much explains the age in which we live.
When you look at heresy throughout church history, heresy is heresy because it is partially true. If it were entirely true, it wouldn't be heresy. It would be something else. It would just be some sort of pagan belief or something like that. And I think what we're seeing specifically right now happening within the church, we could talk about culture, but there's a worldview crisis within Christianity right now, is that this, so many people have grabbed a hold of this progressive Christianity, this woke Christianity. Now, we could say the same thing about whether transcendental meditation, as we would say about progressive Christianity. And I think what these things provide is sort of a halfway house where they can have one foot in spirituality, where they feel connected to a higher power, they feel like they're doing the spiritual thing, they can talk about eternal values, but they can also still do whatever they want. They can justify, the lifestyle that they want. They can justify, all of the crisis over gender and sexuality, their belief systems, all of those things, because they're cutting out and they're really removing from Christianity any part that is offensive to self and their ego, that helps them kind of just, be able to wake up every day, without condemnation. It's the searing of the conscience, I think, from a biblical standpoint, what's happened there.
Yeah, I think that the world is enticed by it because it makes us God. The end. Right? It makes me God. I get to do whatever I want to do, and whatever I feel is right is what is right. Whatever I feel and my feels is what is true. Nobody can tell me differently, and anything that I do wrong, as you just said, Jeff, isn't my fault. Society made me do it, so it's that. I think there's also a spiritual component, obviously, to this. Proverbs 8:36. But he who fails to find me injures himself. All who hate me love death. If you hate wisdom, you begin to love death. I mean, why do we think that abortions are actually rising in this country? Roe gets overturned. It's rising. How many more babies could we want to kill, right? Something in the 40-something% of all abortions are repeat customers. Why is this happening? Why do we call pornography free speech? Because we love death. We're a society that loves it, and we can't get enough of it because we want to be God, and it's just this thing. We need Jesus Christ to set us free and to reshape our minds from the inside out, right?
Yeah. But the key here is that the church has influence, right, in our culture. The craziest statistic that I just read when coming up to this panel was that there is 37% of pastors in America hold to a biblical worldview. It's crazy. 37%. So we're in a room full of pastors. My question is to you is, and we'll start with you, Lucas, because I know you wrote a book about this, addressing woke pastors. I kind of want to hear what you think as far as how can these pastors in this room, when they go back home and they're in their networks with their other pastors and in the community with other pastors, how do they address this? How do they confront this with these other pastors?
Yeah, no, so good. And, Barna has been responsible for a lot of that research, and not the Barna Group, but George Barna at Arizona Christian Cultural Research Center. And his, just a plug, if you're looking for a resource for the millennial generation, I worked on a project there's about 12 of us on that with George, called Helping Millennials Thrive. And it is a great resource for this issue of worldview that I'd highly recommend for pastors to get a hold of. When you look at this, I think that it really starts at the seminaries in a lot of cases, because you have people that go to the seminaries, to become a pastor. They're going to Bible college or a Christian university, and they're expecting that to be the safe place. They're going there because it's not the secular university, that they don't think they're going to have all the things. But oftentimes they find themselves, sort of hijacked or side railed by this progressive ideology from professors. And so, I've done a lot of work on this in some of my writing, where there has been this dark money that's passed into Christian universities in the same way that you had the Harvards and the Yales and the Notre Dames and even like a University of Michigan that used to be very pro-clergy. These institutions that were raising up, they were specifically started to, train up the best pastors in America. Over time, they embrace progressive ideology, and now you can't even get Harvard to mention its Christian roots on the historical tour at Harvard, which I've done. And so now we're starting to see that, though, with some of the second generation schools. I'll probably offend somebody by this, but the Wheatons and the Biolas, they're still great people at these schools. There's still great professors that are there. But there's infiltration happening, the Azusa Pacifics and these things where, it depends on who you get for that class, on how safe it's going to be. And so when you have progressive professors that are then training progressive pastors, now all of a sudden they go back to these pulpits and they're starting to shape progressive parishioners, and we're starting to see that worldview shift in America. And I think that's a major thing. That's not the only thing, but a major part that's responsible for it.
I came up through a Doctor of Philosophy program, so I've never been to seminary. I don't have, a sense of how that all works. But I think a lot of pastors just don't know what to do. 95% of pastors, and this is going back to some of George Barna's research, say they believe the Bible speaks to today's issues. Well, then he pulled one over on them and handed them a list. Which of these issues have you ever addressed from the pulpit? Only 9% of it had ever said anything. Because they don't know how to address the issues except from maybe a politicized point of view. So from the perspective of counterfeit worldviews, anything Christians do is political. Okay, there's no way. If you speak to abortion, you're being political. If you speak to sexuality, you're being political, right? Because to a leftist, everything is political. So what do? And a lot of pastors, they come back from events like this and say, well, I'm just going to address all the issues at one time. And everybody's walking out. What happened to that guy? Why? Oh, you got so cranky all of a sudden. But there is a way to do it, and that is to address what the Bible says about something and then compare it to the counterfeit worldviews. So, for instance, on the question of how could God be good when there's so much evil in the world? Every person in your church is asking that question. Every single kid I work with, that's one of their top 5 questions they ask. But what nobody ever does is say, okay, so how do other worldviews handle that? A secular worldview says, well, it doesn't matter. DNA, as Richard Dawkins said, DNA just is. It doesn't know, it doesn't care about you, it just is. And we dance to its music. So then you start to ask, well, what does the new spiritualist worldview say? That evil doesn't actually exist. Okay, what does a Marxist worldview say? Evil exists because those in power oppress us. And all of a sudden you realize, wait a second, there's only one worldview left standing that makes any sense of the world at all, and that is a biblical worldview.
That's really good. I want to piggyback on that. When I found out we were doing a pastor's summit, I honestly, I just think, why do they want me coming to a pastor's summit? I'm just a dumb rock star. Even though I do dress better than you guys. I don't know. What is this? There's not a single lightning bolt. I don't even understand this. But I really want to piggyback on this because I spend my time around a lot of young people, families, secular world, rock and roll shows. And I go to a church that I love. I have the best church in the world. I love my church leaders. I hope that everything I have to say to you and about them, that everybody understands how honoring I want to be of them. Nobody appreciates pastors and elders and people like that more than me. My father-in-law is one of our pastors. I love my church. I also live in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Kenosha, Wisconsin is where Kyle Rittenhouse shot and killed 2 people. You guys remember the Cryon, the mostly fiery but peaceful protests? 3 blocks from my house, all right? 3 blocks from my house. And we are right in the middle of it. And so you would think that means that we had a lot to talk about at my church. And I will say, love my church. You know how many times we talked about it? 0. We never discussed BLM, systemic racism, whiteness. Is it okay to self-defense? Is self-defense okay or not okay? And the list goes on of the things we never talked about, because my church leaders, who I love, are so committed to the gospel of Jesus Christ that they are absolutely convinced that we don't need to talk about anything else. And I keep saying, I meet pastors like this all the time, and I just say, you are never going to convince your people that just stop worrying about abortion. Stop worrying about BLM. Stop worrying about DEI class. Stop worrying about drag queens coming into the kids' schools and teaching them about transgender. It doesn't fine. They'll hear the gospel at church. Who cares if they learn there's 32 genders? Who cares if a dude comes into your daughter's dressing room? Who cares if fill in the blank? You're never going to convince any people, and I would argue you shouldn't convince them that these things don't matter, because they are reshaping and restructuring the world they live in. So the question has to come down to, are your people going to hear it from you, or are they going to hear it from Madonna or Britney Spears or whoever young people listen to today? Because I don't even know, because I listen to cool music. I don't even know who sings WAP. There you go. Are they going to hear it from these people, or are they going to hear it from you, their pastor? This really upsets me, because Christ has something to say about the way the world is created and the way things should be run. So let's do it, baby.
A couple things on that. I am a pastor myself. I started preaching at 17. I've been at the same church. This is actually our 19th year. We have an anniversary next month for that. And that's a rarity that somebody's at a church that long that they started. And I don't take that for granted. And we even make it through Indiana winters to do that. And so it's God for that reason. But look, I was at one time kind of lured by the Christian left early on in my ministry. Fortunately, I had some people that pulled me out of that pretty quickly. But I've always had a fairly conservative worldview. I've been biblically minded on a lot of the major issues, but I wasn't focused on those things the way that I am now. And in 2015, 2016, I made a conscious choice. And it was really more about what was happening locally in South Bend with Buttigieg, even than it was the national election. But I started teaching through a series on what does the Bible have to say about all these issues. And I was watching, this young guy go on the campaign trail and exegete passages of Scripture and use them to justify, all the various socialist and Marxist ideologies that he was pushing. And so, I started addressing that, because we had a lot of people that were tied into the community that were influential, and I wanted to make sure that our church had a good worldview about this. And we lost 40 to 50% of our church in 8 weeks. 8 weeks. And now look, I wasn't yelling at anybody. I still don't own a red hat to this day. If somebody wants to give me one, I'd, take it. We didn't endorse a candidate from the stage. It was just, what does the Bible have to say about free market versus socialism? What does it have to say about sexuality, gender, these things? Wasn't addressing even people's names from the stage. And I had a choice at that moment. Do I, capitulate and, sort of try to reel back on this, or do we double down? And we've doubled down. Since that time, thank you. We shut down for 3 weeks during, COVID, and went to live stream only. And then we're like, wait a minute, something doesn't smell right here. We opened back immediately. Told my church I don't work for the health department. We've grown 4 times since that. And so, I'll kind of end with this, is that, pastors, in the same way that we see, and Jeff brought this up, Satan come in the garden, really, we have this whole experience. And what's God's response? Who told you that you were naked? And to that, I would say, who told you that abortion was a political issue? Who told you that, sexuality and marriage was a political issue? Who told you even that national sovereignty and an open southern border is a political issue? God establishes nations. All of these things, first and foremost, are theological, spiritual issues. Our faith might shape our politic, and hopefully should, but these are not first and foremost political issues. They're spiritual issues, and you have an obligation to prepare God's people by teaching them about them.
Yeah. And kind of before we close, in just a few more minutes, I saw another statistic that said 13% of youth pastors and children's pastors hold to a biblical worldview. They're the ones who are leading the next generation, investing and discipling. A lot of parents in y'all's churches trust these youth pastors, and I know some of your youth pastors may even be or borderline woke pastors. So how should they address these pastors, these youth pastors, and then how should they be shaping the worldview of the next generation? I know this is what you're strong in, Jeff.
Yeah, so I'm very passionate about this. So I take your question and then I change it to the question that I want to answer. That's how we roll.
Is that good? Is that good marriage advice?
Works every time.
In Gen Z, 1% have a biblical worldview. And 70% of young adults who are significantly involved in church in their high school years are no longer even attending church by the time they reach their mid-20s. That's the bad news, but I want to give you the good news. It is not inevitable that young adults walk away from their faith. So what we have found at Summit Ministries, we have this kind of classic 11-day program where we bring in Christian apologists like Dr. Frank Turek, who will be here with you, people to address issues from a biblical worldview. We ask students, bring all of your tough questions with you, and then we're going to talk about a biblical worldview and show how it is plausible that this worldview, better than any other, explains the world we actually live in. Then we're going to talk about the counterfeit worldviews. Then we're going to equip you to talk about all of this. 1%, remember, is their peer group. By the time they leave those 11 days, 94% say they embrace a biblical worldview.
That's impressive.
And so we continue studying them 1 year, 5 years, 10 years out. 85% maintain a biblical worldview. Now, Lucas speaks at this program. He can tell you we create an environment where young adults want to learn, where it is cool to learn and grow. And the impact of that is so incredible. You know, let me ask you, if you knew that an 11-day program could have that kind of impact, and they could come back with a passion for Christ and a passion to make a difference in the world, would you not move heaven and earth to make it possible for every young adult in your church to have an experience like that? To me, that's what the focus should be. If we can help you, summit.org/church, and then you'll see the resources that we have for you
recommend
there.
it enough. It's phenomenal.
John, anything you want to add before we close?
I would love to say this. This is something I'm really passionate about that I think we all need to do. I've written this in a book that's going to be coming out later this year, but it's basically, it's really simple, but it's amazing how many people I think have forgotten this. And it's that God created let me start over. I think we spend so much time complaining about stuff that maybe we're not doing the best job of putting out a positive view for young people. This is why it's positive as opposed to just, don't do this. Why does it matter? God created a moral universe. Then he gave us a moral law that is compatible with his moral universe. So think about it like this, how weird it would be for God to say, man shall not lay with man as he lays with a woman. But in the natural world, that's the only way to produce children. Do you see? That would be really weird. God would be giving you a moral law, but it makes things in your life go really bad. That would be really strange, right? Actually, what God did is he created a moral universe, and then he gives us a moral law, and when you obey his commandments, you find out that you are blessed. When you obey his commandments, you flourish, you produce, you create nations that are good, you create laws that are actually good, you create true equality, not fake equity, which is what the left is always talking about. You create a society that says, no, pornography is not free speech. No, we will not allow pornography anywhere, not just for 18 and above. It won't be allowed anywhere because it is slavery. That is not actually what liberty is. So when you obey the moral commands of God, your life is going to be so much better. And I think if we could promote this positive vision as opposed to God's just saying, don't do this, as if it's arbitrary. But the law of God is not arbitrary. His ways lead to life. And I think we need to do a better job of putting that positive vision out.
Lucas, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. All right. So, first off, I think that I think that what you're doing here is if it's not the continuation of your journey into becoming more serious about these things, I hope it's at least the start for you. This matters. And I'm so thankful for groups, like Turning Point USA and Turning Point Faith and Charlie and Will and everybody that's part of this, that this churches have to start working together. Focus on unifying with other brothers and sisters in Christ over primary doctrines, and let's circle the wagons against this false ideology. Stop fighting about micro doctrines with each other. Circle the wagons, and let's really stamp out this heresy once and for all.
Amen.
That's it. Thank you, guys. God bless y'all.
I want to say thank you to Turning Point USA for letting us play this interview on the Dr. Jeff Show podcast. Thank you to John Cooper and to Lucas Miles for the enjoyable conversation and for their friendship. Just two guys who really love the Lord and want to see Christians grow up and be strong in their faith. The Dr. Jeff Show podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. Summit equips and supports the rising generation to embrace God's truth and to champion a biblical worldview. If you'd like more information about the programs and content that Summit offers, go to summit.org. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to today's episode. The Dr. Jeff Show podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. Summit equips and supports the rising generation to embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. If you want more resources that can help you live out a biblical worldview as a student or reach the next generation as an educator, church leader, or parent, head over to summit.org/resources to find out about the programs, the articles, the videos, the ebooks, and more that we offer. Also, if you're looking for more great podcasts that will build your faith and inspire you, our friends at Edify have what you need. You can find more podcasts, including the Dr. Jeff Show podcast, on the Edify app. Download it at edify.app, spell EDIFI. And then you can also search for it in the Apple Store or the Google Play Store.